Hello, everybody. One JK, another JK.
Jennifer Krasinski, Jennifer Kabat, for those of you who we've never met before. And first of all, congratulations to the graduates. We're so excited for you.
We're so excited.
And so what we're doing is a sort of like little aperture, why right now, a perennial question.
A perennial question, which might seem at this moment even more crucial or terrifying.
And so what, obviously a huge topic, so we're just going to do our best to sort of condense it into 10 minutes and kind of give you a sample of how we like to babble in front of the students and hopefully say useful things. I will start, actually, because I wanted to pull a quote from Jennifer's new book, Night Shining. And this quote is just a way for us to launch into an idea of why right now and also what to write now. And so... They're not readers. One of the reasons I stop writing fiction is that it requires me to reduce these elements to what suits a narrative. Details are shaped and bent to create a sense of character and their motivations and actions. What doesn't fit, what isn't necessary, what doesn't elucidate or explain or further the plot gets cut. This idea of everything working in one direction stifles the nuance I hope to find. And I do not want to construct a story of anger at my father. I also cannot bear to turn those incidents into scenes, which means re-inhabiting them here on the page and keeping them alive. JK.
Thank you, Jennifer. So I have, for years now, been teaching Jennifer Krasinski's writing. She is a beautiful critic who writes so lucidly and luminously about whatever she is embracing, whether it's performance or art or film or literature. And I wanted to read a quote from hers, and I was like, oh my God, how do I pick a quote? Well, randomly, I happened to read a review of hers that published this week, and I got my quote, and it's perfect. So I'm gonna just start with this random quote, which also happens to begin this review. Love isn't a tenable critical position. And most of the time, I think that's exactly as it should be. Love makes us corny, blurs our edges, and, the worst fate for a writer, induces hyperbole. Yet there are occasions when a critic, so moved by an artist and their art, is made corny, feels the blurring of their edges, and tries to recompose the oncoming hyperbole into a more respectable, rhapsodic form, all while squirming at the thought of maybe, just maybe, having to use that word. And that word is love. And this fall, Jennifer Krasinski and a couple of other writers, Ismail Muhammad, who is an editor at the New York Times Magazine, and Naila Orr, who is also at the New York Times Magazine but left to work on a book, came to talk about criticism and writing. And JK said this thing about love, that like criticism is about love. And I think that writing is both about love and building community, even if you are being critical of that community. And that is what we've hopefully tried to impart. And some of that is about coming from a very individual and idiosyncratic point of view. And now I'm going to pass that back to JK.
Well, I want to ask you a question, Jennifer, because you play around so much with form and with genre. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Jennifer Kabat's work, and it's hard to condense into, say, 2 sentences, we're on the time clock, Jennifer weaves personal history into larger American history, into ideas of place and loss and time passing and time stopping. And so let's talk a little bit about why, gosh, one question I have for you actually is writing as recovery process, like writing and research as having to mark the moment in which we are in right now.
So I have two different answers for this. The first would be a gesture at John Key, sitting over there, who also wrote a book that was deeply personal and highly researched, and about finding love and community in Black, queer, and untold, looking to find an archive of Black queerness that might stand for love and community and build more community. And so for me, I live in a very small rural community when I'm not teaching here, which is most of the time I'm up there, and I'm a member of my volunteer fire department. And I excavated local histories where I am and did it in a kind of experimental way. And those two histories, one where there was a socialist uprising in my town in 1845 that looked very much like Trumpism. You know, it was armed, they wore disguises, it looked a lot like January 6th. And most of the people I'm in the fire department were, their forebears were part of that, but have very different politics. So I wanted to write about that as a way of understanding this moment. And in the second book, my town was flooded with a geoengineering experiment in 1950. And that was a way for me to think about the climate crisis. And both the books are experimental. They also layer in my family history and my own history there. But the thing that I have found really wild in this, which I would also impart to our grad students, which is also the JK lesson over there, is that writing for a community is really meaningful. It's not writing for an abstract audience. It's not like writing because I want everybody to read it. It's writing because at the moment when the milk truck crashes on Route 28 and I'm there for 6 hours, when somebody who's been in the fire department for years comes up to me and says, that way you wrote about the pledge and inequality, where I'm talking about the Pledge of Allegiance because we have to say that in the fire hall at our meetings, that really meant something to me. And so that's that. JK. I mean, when you are thinking about criticism now as a form and its voice and importance, tell me why. Like, particularly when you were thinking about, say, experimental work and situating yourself within experimental work.
I mean, I think, oh gosh,
that's like maybe 5 questions.
It's maybe 5, but I'll go for 1 or 2. One of which is I have always loved the critical form. I mean, criticism as a literary form, and I've always thought of it that way primarily, so that any experimentation that comes along, and you will see some of this from students tonight, any sort of tweaks to the narrative or evolutions and changes in approach, this is necessary, I think, to keeping the form alive and vibrant and responsive to the moment in time. But actually, in a funny way, one of my great sort of influences, Richard Foreman, who was an experimental theater maker, and he had this sort of process by which he would say yes, and you'd have to resist the moment in which you are living too, meaning that when you are writing in a moment in time, you also have to step outside of it and have to know that it too will pass. And so there's always that tricky wicket, right, with trying to sort of mark this moment. And then you had another question about sort of the experimental and one of the reasons I write criticism is because I am very interested in certain communities who are not sort of being paid attention to and talked about and thought about. And it is such a privilege when you get to sit down with someone's new book, their artworks, their music, and really engage as audience first and foremost. Because a writer, I do think, first and foremost, has to be or a critic rather, has to be the highest form of audience possible. One has to remain open and supple and yet still opinionated and irascible and demanding of our of what is in front of us, and then somehow find a way to articulate all of that. And I think something that we've talked about in relation to this program is the radical importance right now of research, probably for very obvious reasons, but not just simply stating one's opinion, which is something that people think criticism is, but rather highly researched, highly crafted arguments, based in fact and reality, and realities that can be, of course, supple and perhaps divisive, or rather sort of points of contention, what we call interpretive work. But this is something that I think distinguishes this program. And I wonder, I would like to hear from you about where research falls into the process and of what importance it is to you.
That's a big question.
It is,
I mean,
I know.
I'm just going to say I'm a really, I was a bad fiction writer, which perhaps got gestured to in the passage Jennifer read. And I needed to do research to find us, to have standing, to have a place to come from in writing. And I think that that is something that we get to witness in the program when people come in and have a project that they want to dedicate 9 months to. Yeah. And that, like, we do live in a moment where facts seem to be fluid. But what is really wild is seeing people do deep research that anchors ideas. And that doesn't mean that the personal or the opinion isn't part of it, but that they have a lot of depth. And I want to say one thing, which is that we've had this joy of working with these students. And in that, like, witnessing their wrong turns and the research strands that they start and put down. I seem to remember birding and boundary waters and all of these things, but they're not wrong turns. They're part of the process. That, like, the process of writing is the process of the thing that you set aside. And my 2 books came from parting out of one failed book and from ideas that I'd had sitting sort of aside for years. And so nothing is wasted. And none of those, like, scratched out sentences that don't quite fit are wasted. It's part of the process. And there's a real intimacy. Like, there's an intimacy that JK and I have by being writers who share work together, which means you're seeing our most vulnerable selves because we are, if nothing, if not writers at our core. And there's this amazing thing with the students that they allow themselves that vulnerability with us. And I want you to applaud them for that, because it's amazing.
We're at time, but a last remark would be congratulations. And it's a very selfish thing to teach in a program like this, because truly there is no greater honor than going out into the world and having met all of these peers and having worked with these peers. Yes, it's true. And so congratulations, you all. JK, do you have a last remark before Eric brings out the cane?
We love you all. And it's like, it's amazing. We're very lucky. Like, it is truly the thing that feeds us, is to think alongside you. Yeah.